When my grandfather died, everyone told me I had inherited a fortune. A month later, I realized I might have inherited a financial collapse instead. At first, I believed them. My grandfather, Silas, had lived to 105. He had outlived friends, siblings, business partners, and eventually his own son. My father, Dad, died in 2022 after a long fight with cancer. He had always been expected to inherit most of what Silas owned, but my grandfather's estate plan said that if my father died first, his share would pass to me. That was how I ended up sitting in an attorney's office, staring at documents connected to roughly 20 rental units spread across several states. Some were houses. Some were condos. Several were near the coast. There were long-term tenants, short-term rentals, management agreements, mortgages, insurance policies, HOA statements, and accounts connected to my grandfather's LLC. Then there was the cash. A little over $400,000 in liquid assets that, depending on estate expenses and the final distribution, I was expected to receive as well. I remember leaving that first meeting in shock. My mother, Maya, walked beside me carrying one of the folders. "You're going to be okay," she said. At that point, the numbers sounded enormous in the best possible way. 20 rental units. Coastal properties. Hundreds of thousands in cash. People heard that and used words like lucky. Set for life. Generational wealth. For about a week, I believed them. Then my mother came over one evening with a laptop, 2 notebooks, and enough coffee to keep us awake for hours. "We're not making any decisions until we understand what you actually inherited," she said. That was when everything started changing. We began with one of the larger rental houses. From the photos, it looked beautiful. Multiple bedrooms. Large windows. A view people would pay good money to wake up to. I searched the address online and found an estimated market value of around $720,000. I stared at the screen. "That's one house." My mother smiled. "Exactly." Then I opened the most recent mortgage statement. The payoff balance was around $755,000. I checked the number twice. Then I turned the laptop toward my mother. "Why does he owe more than the house is supposedly worth?" Her expression changed. We went through the purchase records. Silas's LLC had bought the property a few years earlier, near the top of a much hotter market, for around $850,000. The online estimate was lower now. The mortgage balance was still high. And when we reviewed the rental statements, the situation got worse. The house brought in money. Just not enough. There were strong rental periods, but there were also slow months. Once we added management fees, insurance, taxes, maintenance, utilities during vacancies, and the mortgage payment, the property was losing money. My mother looked at me. Maybe this one was just a bad buy. I wanted that to be true. So we opened the next file. Different property. Similar problem. Then another. By the end of that night, we had found several properties where the estimated value appeared lower than the mortgage balance. The exact numbers were still uncertain because we only had online estimates, not appraisals or actual offers. But the pattern was obvious. A significant part of the portfolio had been bought when property prices were much higher, and some of those rentals were no longer generating enough income to support the debt attached to them. I stopped looking at the word inheritance the same way after that. Over the next few weeks, my mother and I went through everything we could find. We weren't managing the properties ourselves. Silas had already been using management companies, bookkeepers, and contractors. That helped. It also made the situation more complicated. There were multiple companies. Different agreements. Different fee structures. Different loan terms. Some properties had been held directly in Silas's name and were now being handled through the estate. Others belonged to the LLC. And I quickly learned that inheriting an interest in something did not automatically make me personally responsible for every debt attached to it. The estate attorney warned me not to start paying random obligations from my own personal account just because I was panicking. "Before you put your own money into anything," he said, "we need to know who legally owes what." I stared at him. "Aren't they all mine now?" Not that simply. That answer both relieved and terrified me. He explained that the ownership structure, the estate, the LLC, the loan documents, and any personal guarantees all mattered. Some obligations might stay with the property. Some might belong to the LLC. Some might be estate obligations. And some could create broader problems depending on how Silas had structured the loans. The only thing everyone agreed on was that I should not assume I personally had to rescue every property with the cash I expected to inherit. The problem was that the bills didn't pause while we figured that out. Mortgages were still due. HA fees were still due. Insurance was still due. Repairs still happened. One morning, I opened an email about an air conditioning system that had failed at one of the condos. The repair estimate was several $1,000s. I stared at the screen until I started laughing. My mother heard me from the other room. What happened? I turned the laptop toward her. She read the estimate and sat down beside me. We can handle one repair. That's not the point. I know. No, I don't think you do. She looked at me. What if this happens at 3 properties next month? What if one roof needs replacing? What if insurance goes up again? What if another place sits empty for 6 months? We don't know that will happen. We also don't know that it won't. That was the problem with everything. We didn't know. The smaller condos had looked safer at first. They had lower purchase prices than the larger houses, so I assumed they would be easier to deal with. Then I saw the HOA statements. One condo had monthly fees so high I thought I was reading the statement incorrectly. Another had a special assessment. Another had barely been rented in months. I pulled up the short-term rental calendar and saw long stretches of empty dates. A weekend booking. Nothing. 2 nights occupied. Then weeks vacant again. I called one of the management companies. Why isn't this unit getting more bookings? The manager sounded careful. It is listed. That's not what I asked. The market has become more competitive. So the price is too high? We've already adjusted the rate. And it's still empty. There was a pause. There are a lot more units available now than there used to be. I looked at the calendar again. My grandfather had bought several of these properties between 2020 and 2022. He had been close to 100 years old. That fact kept bothering me. Not because he had been confused. Silas was mentally sharp for most of his final years. But he was no longer personally handling every detail. He relied heavily on managers, brokers, lenders, and advisors. His LLC made the purchases, and he approved the larger decisions. Maybe everyone around him believed the market would stay strong. Maybe he did too. The records didn't tell me what he believed. They only showed what happened afterward. One property manager named Stella had worked with several of the rentals. When I finally spoke to her, I expected reassurance. Instead, she said, "You should know the portfolio was already under pressure before your grandfather passed." I went quiet. What does that mean? He had been asking us to improve occupancy and reduce unnecessary expenses. How bad was it? I can only speak for the properties we managed. Then speak for those. Another pause. Some were doing fine. Some weren't. That's not very specific. I don't want to give you information outside what I can document. That answer annoyed me at first. Later, I respected it. She sent me the statements. The numbers were there. One property was profitable. Another was close to breaking even. Another had looked profitable before repairs and management fees were included. One was losing money even during decent rental months. That was when I realized I had been thinking about the portfolio the wrong way. I kept imagining one giant inheritance. It wasn't. It was a collection of separate financial decisions tied together by the same owner. A few weeks later, my mother and I met with an accountant named Caleb who had experience reviewing rental properties. He spent hours going through the records. He didn't react dramatically. That made me more nervous. Finally, he leaned back. "You don't have one decision to make." I frowned. "What does that mean?" "You have a different decision for almost every property." My mother asked, "Can't she just sell the bad ones?" "Maybe." "Why maybe?" "Because first we need real numbers." He pointed to the property I had originally believed was worth around $720,000. "This online estimate is not a guaranteed sale price." "I know that now." "Good. You need actual market opinions. Payoff statements. Selling costs. Repairs. Commissions. Closing costs. Any unpaid balances. Then you compare all of that with realistic offers. So if this place sold for $720,000, I could still come up short? Potentially. How much? That depends on the final sale. For one property? Yes. My mother looked at me. I already knew what she was thinking. The $400,000. The money everyone had congratulated me for inheriting. I could now see how easily it could disappear. Not because someone stole it. Not because I spent it recklessly. But because I might use it trying to preserve properties that were already losing money. Caleb went through the rest of the portfolio. Some properties appeared strong. A few had manageable debt and reliable tenants. Some were uncertain. They might improve with better management, lower expenses, or stronger seasonal demand. Then there were the problem properties. High debt, weak cash flow, high carrying costs, little or no equity. Those were the ones that kept me awake. My mother tried to simplify it. Keep the good ones. Sell the bad ones. That sounds easy when you say it. Maybe it is that simple. It's not. Why? Because selling the bad ones might cost money. Then use some of the inheritance. And if it takes half of it? We decide. And if another property needs $50,000 after that? She sighed. Then what are you saying? I looked at her. I don't know how much money I'm supposed to lose proving I deserve to keep what Grandpa left me. She didn't answer. That was the first time I said the real fear out loud. Every time I thought about selling, I felt like I was dismantling something Silas had spent his life building. Every time I considered using the entire cash inheritance to keep the portfolio alive, another part of me wondered whether I was about to destroy my own future for decisions I hadn't made. My mother saw what it was doing to me. One afternoon, she placed a printed bank statement on the table. I looked at it. Then at her. No. Elena. No. You haven't even listened. I know what this is. She had savings. Not enough to rescue an entire property portfolio, but enough that she thought she could help with temporary gaps. I pushed the paper back toward her. Absolutely not. You're my daughter. And that's exactly why I'm saying no. If one property only needs. No. Her jaw tightened. You don't get to decide whether I help you. I get to decide whether I accept it. She looked hurt. I softened my voice. Dad worked for years. You saved that money. I am not letting you risk your security on a property Grandpa bought near the top of the market because I'm scared to let it go. Her eyes filled. You think I'm supposed to sit here and watch you deal with all of this alone? I'm not alone. You barely sleep. That doesn't mean you empty your savings. I never said empty. Where does it stop? She looked down. Neither of us had an answer. A repair could make sense. Temporary support for a strong property could make sense. But a bad property could absorb money indefinitely. I was starting to understand that loving the person who bought something did not change the numbers required to keep it. My mother wanted to visit a few of the properties before we made major decisions. We did. That complicated everything. Numbers are easier when they stay on paper. A property is harder when someone lives there. At one long-term rental, I met a tenant named Joy. She had been there for several years. When I told her who I was, her face softened. I'm sorry about your grandfather. Thank you. He was always kind to me. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. Silas wasn't just a signature on mortgage documents. He had spoken to people, approved repairs, renewed leases, made decisions that affected where families lived. Joy hesitated. Are you selling? I looked at her. We haven't decided anything yet. She nodded, but I could see the worry immediately. I wanted to reassure her. I couldn't. Even if a property was sold, the existing lease and local laws still mattered. I knew enough by then not to make promises I couldn't keep. So I said, we're reviewing everything carefully. That night, I told my mother I felt guilty. You cannot save every property and every person connected to it, she said. I know. Then stop acting like every bad outcome will be your fault. It's mine now. The decision is yours. The history behind it is not. I knew she was right. That didn't make the decisions easier. The next major turning point came when we finally gained access to more complete records connected to the LLC. There were more obligations than I had realized. Credit lines, pending maintenance bills, deposits for future short-term bookings, security deposits that had to be properly accounted for, upcoming insurance renewals, unfinished repairs. None of it, by itself, was enough to destroy the estate. Together, it changed the picture. One property was profitable, but its income had helped support weaker ones. Another looked healthy until a major repair was included. One condo had an HA issue that could become expensive. Another property had enough equity that selling it might create cash, but selling it would also mean giving up one of the strongest assets. The portfolio was being pulled in different directions. Then I found an old email from Silas. It had been sent to one of the management companies several months before he died. The message was brief. He was asking whether they could improve winter occupancy because the portfolio needed stronger cash flow. I read that line several times. The portfolio needs stronger cash flow. My mother read it too. He knew. Maybe? What do you mean, maybe? He knew cash flow was tight. That sounds like he knew. It doesn't tell us how serious he thought it was. That distinction mattered. Silas had lived through market downturns before. Maybe he believed this one was temporary. Maybe he thought the properties would recover. Maybe he planned to sell something. I would never know. A second attorney eventually helped us sort the properties by ownership, debt, guarantees, and legal exposure. He warned me again not to treat the situation like one giant mortgage problem. Some assets may be worth keeping, he said. Some may not. What happens to the ones that aren't? That depends. I almost laughed. Every professional answer seemed to begin with those two words. He continued. A sale is one option. A negotiated sale where a lender agrees to accept less than the full balance may be possible in some situations. Refinancing may or may not make sense. Certain properties may have to be dealt with through the estate or LLC. And in the worst cases, lender remedies may become part of the conversation. Foreclosure. Possibly. But you should not jump to that conclusion before understanding the consequences. Could they come after me personally? Not simply because you are the heir. But we need to review each loan and any guarantees. For weeks, I had imagined the banks taking everything I owned because I had inherited someone else's mortgages. The reality was more complicated. We started dividing the properties into 3 groups. Strong, uncertain, problematic. The strong properties had manageable debt, reasonable expenses, and steady income. The uncertain properties might improve with better management. The problem properties were the ones where the numbers no longer made sense without a major change. Seeing everything separated forced me to accept something I had been resisting. My grandfather had built something impressive. He had also made risky decisions near the end of his life. Both could be true. I didn't have to turn him into either a genius or a fool. Some of his properties were good investments. Some were not. And I couldn't make decisions based only on what the market might do someday. I had to decide what the estate could survive now. That was when my thinking changed. I stopped asking, how do I save all of this? I started asking, what is actually worth saving? The question felt cruel, but it was honest. We began ordering real valuations instead of relying on online estimates. Some properties were worth more than I feared. Others were not. A few could likely be sold without major damage. One property I thought was hopeless had stronger market interest than expected. Another I had hoped to keep looked worse after we accounted for repairs. There was no single dramatic revelation, just a series of smaller ones. No hidden document proving everything was secretly fine. No mysterious account large enough to erase the debt. Just assets, loans, contracts, people, and choices. One night, after another long day of reviewing numbers, I found an old voicemail from my grandfather. It had nothing to do with the properties. He was complaining that I had not visited recently. His voice was irritated. You young people always think you have more time than you do. I sat there listening to it. Then I played it again. I had spent months studying the financial decisions of a man I could no longer question. Why did you buy these properties? Were you worried? Did Dad know how tight things were getting? What were you planning to do? Did you expect me to keep all of it? I would never hear his answers. That was when I understood why the inheritance felt so heavy. I knew what Silas owned. I knew what he owed. I knew some of what he had tried to do. But I didn't know what he would have done next. The estate is still being sorted out. Some properties will probably be sold. Some may stay. A few are still being evaluated. The strongest ones may become the actual inheritance everyone thought I received in the first place. The weakest ones may have to go, even if the loss hurts. I still don't know how much of the cash will remain when everything is finished. My mother still offers to help. I still tell her not to risk her savings unless there is a clear, limited reason. We still argue about it. People still congratulate me when they hear I inherited real estate. They imagine ocean views, passive income, freedom. They do not imagine mortgage payoff statements, vacant calendars, HOA assessments, insurance renewals, repair estimates, or attorneys explaining why every answer depends on another document. They definitely do not imagine sitting at a kitchen table wondering whether the smartest way to preserve an inheritance is to let part of it go. That is where I am now. The real decision is not whether I keep everything or lose everything. It is how much of my grandfather's legacy I should protect if protecting all of it could destroy the healthy parts too. I still listen to his voicemail sometimes. You young people always think you have more time than you do. Maybe he thought he had more time to fix the portfolio. Maybe near the end, he was facing the same thing I am now. A list of options where every choice means losing something. And I still don't know where that line is.